All right, our next speaker is Dex Hunter-Torricke. Dex is one of the world's leading strategists and thinkers on AI, with nearly 2 decades of experience at the intersection of technology and global power. He has advised some of the most influential leaders of our time, including as head of communications for SpaceX, where he reported to Elon Musk, head of communications for Mark Zuckerberg at Meta and at Facebook, and as Google's first executive speechwriter, supporting Executive Chairman Eric Schmidt. Dex began his career as an advisor to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. More recently, Dex has been head of communications and marketing for Google's DeepMind, where he led the launch of Gemini, the company's flagship AI system. Dex's last day at Google was last week. And later this month, he'll be announcing an exciting new chapter in his career. Dex is a fellow at the AI research nonprofit Fathom, and a fellow at the University of Cambridge Think Lab. Dex, welcome to the stage. Welcome to the Mars Study.
It's great to be here. I used to live in LA, obviously, when I was working at SpaceX, and I don't get to LA as much as I'd like to these days. So I literally arrived about 5 minutes ago, and it's kind of funny because the whole last few days I've just been thinking about Mars and spending this time with all of you, and then it's like you sometimes have to look up at the stars, but also think about LA traffic, which is really a big problem. So I'm going to start just by talking a little bit about what brought me to SpaceX in the first place. So I think, like a lot of folks here, I grew up as just a huge science fiction nerd. And, we've all got our favorite depictions of Mars and space, in the books and the movies and the things that we all love. But this is actually relevant to how I ended up working for Elon, because it was 2016. And at the time, I was working for Mark Zuckerberg, and I was living in San Francisco. And I had flown down to Hawthorne for the day to do an interview with Elon to be head of communications for SpaceX. And obviously, it seems difficult to believe now, looking at the trajectory of the company over the last few years. But at the time, SpaceX was obviously the underdog. It was the insurgent in the aerospace industry. And obviously, there are a lot of folks and ULA and national space programs that sort of seem to have the edge on the future. And Elon had brought me in, or at least I was told Elon wanted to bring me in to manage that political and regulatory fistfight in Washington, so you could actually get to the point where folks would be thinking, can I depend upon the Falcon 9 as my launch workhorse? And so I got to the SpaceX factory for my interview with Elon, and when I got there, they said he was running a little late. He was running 4.5 hours late, which most people would say is more than a little late. So they didn't really know what to do with me. So they said, why don't you go have a really nice lunch at that steakhouse down the street? And I thought, I'm pretty fast-paced, the ADHD. And I was like, 4.5 hours for lunch? I've never done that in my life. Anyway, so I went there and I thought, right, I'll use it for some extra time to prepare for this conversation. And by the time I went back to the factory and Elon arrived, I thought I had gamed out every conceivable question he could possibly ask me about what a communication strategy, what a regulatory strategy would look like for the world's hottest aerospace insurgent. And when I got back there, and I went into Elon's office, he only actually wanted to talk about one thing, which was this. He said, what does the government of Mars look like? Which is not one of the interview questions I prepared for in my 4.5 hours. And luckily, because I read so much science fiction, I ended up going back to my favorite depictions of what that far future of humanity looked like. And what we ended up talking about for the next hour is Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy, which I'm sure most of this room has read or is familiar with, and is personally my favorite depiction of what that future looks like. Because, of course, I think truly, exceptional science fiction is in fact mostly not about the science at all. It is about what becomes of us as a civilization, as people. And it's a truly exceptional series of books, and I know that's why so many folks from NASA astronauts to, West Point, grads, they all love those books and, often look at them, in professional settings, because they're mostly all about the social, the economic, the political, the geopolitical ramifications of what building an entire world is all about. And I so strongly agree with the last speaker, this is truly all about world building. And it's very complicated to build a whole new world. Now, at the time, I don't know, I was 30 years old, I was kind of an idiot. I thought, why is he actually asking that question, right? I mean, it's like, this guy doesn't like complying with regulations on Earth, and he wants to talk about the regulatory environment on Mars. It's like, it's a little bit weird. But I now talk about this all the time, right? Because apart from the fact it's an exceptional Elon story at a time when there's increasingly fewer exceptional Elon stories, it's also one of those things which is a really clever question if you think about it. Because when we think about building entire worlds, the natural temptation, particularly for serious folks like all of you, is probably to reduce it down to the really practical problem solving immediately. There's probably a bunch of you who are thinking, I came here to hear about AI and specifically what the heck is it going to do to help us get to Mars? And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But there are a bigger set of fundamental questions and scenarios and possibilities which we absolutely have to take seriously. Because at some point this century, if Elon or anyone else who's heading for Mars succeeds in their ambition, then someone is going to have to answer that question seriously. What does a government of Mars look like? If you want to have human activity and community and maybe company activity and nations all operating on an entirely new world, how do you organize that new world? And obviously some of the things we've done in international law and other things can illuminate parts of that problem. But I promise you that the idea that we have a well thought out, structured, detailed plan for how to organize all of that based on things that were written decades ago, I've got a bridge to the future to sell you if you believe that. And so this is the starting point for what I'm going to talk about. There are things that are underway now in the world, this world, which will radically transform the nature of our path to Mars. It is far less simple than I think we sometimes think, because we all love space. We all love the idea of the story, that animating quest for humanity to reach out for another world and build it. But before we get there, we are going to have to figure out a whole bunch of other things. And that's where AI will help us solve some of them, but it will also cause us all sorts of other challenges. Now, at Google for the last several years, and I was at Google, then Meta when it was still Facebook, and then SpaceX, and then I was back at Google, glutton for punishment for the last several years. The whole time, that trajectory for the last 15 years in big tech for me has been AI getting more and more advanced. And we're not going to get into all the ways you can measure AI models, but certainly as a general principle, shocker, AI systems are rapidly advancing in their capabilities almost by the week now. Frankly, the last several years of my life have been the fastest pace, and I was pretty fast paced before. It is almost impossible to keep up with the pace of advancement in the AI models that power all of the systems and products that we are now, of course, all making use of. And along the way, something exceptional has happened in the scientific realm. We have seen a vast explosion in scientific discovery and the amazing work that begins in the lab that ends up powering all of the things that this room cares about. There's plenty of research and data points we can talk about, but some of the things that I just pay attention to, scientists using AI as a core part of their research work are now publishing about 67% more papers than non-AI using colleagues. They're getting more than 3 times as many citations. They're getting promoted faster in the lab. All sorts of ripple effects as you see what access to more capable machine power allows us to do with that vast body of data. In all sorts of the realms of science that all of us care about and which are essential for cracking different parts of the scientific challenges that stand in the way of getting to Mars, one of the most exciting is a piece of work that my now former boss, Sir Demis Hassabis, was able to achieve. He got a Nobel Prize, obviously, for this last year, which is AlphaFold. So AlphaFold, the flagship AI system from Google DeepMind before Gemini, was designed to do one thing, which was to decode the structure of proteins. And of course, proteins, the building blocks of life, if you could understand those structures, you could do all sorts of transformative things, from curing major diseases to inventing new enzymes. Absolutely, you would be able to do a bunch of things that we need to do to prepare humans to live on a planet where we will face extreme environmental challenges and challenges to the human physiology on the journey even to Mars. And after many decades, more than 50 years, human scientists had successfully decoded the structure of about 170,000 proteins, which sounds like a lot, except scientists also estimated there's about 220 million proteins. So at the pace we are going, it would take thousands of years to actually work our way through the full compendium of those structures. AlphaFold began demoing a prototype system in 2018 within Google. By 2022, DeepMind had successfully decoded the structure of all 220 million proteins. The data was completely open source and put online. It is now being used by more than 2 million scientific teams around the world to do all of the things I talked about. Everything from working to cure cancers, invent enzymes that can eat plastic micropollution, overcome antibiotic resistance, develop new malaria vaccines. That's what won Demis the Nobel Prize. That is a single AI system based on technology from a few years ago. And we have yet to see the full effects of what is coming. And yet I talk all the time to the world's leading researchers who are using AlphaFold now for some of those pieces of work. They have rock solid 100% confidence the first major diseases to be cured with treatments derived from AlphaFold will arrive within the next decade. One single example. And then the applications just get more and more interesting for us. Of course, using AI to discover entirely new materials, things that never existed before, which allow us to build differently to transform the physical world around us. That is, of course, another huge area of application. This is a lab in Berkeley, which is using a different AI system, which was done in partnership with Google, called GNOME. GNOME was able to discover the single largest set of new materials in human history in a single moment. So it was more than 2.2 million new types of inorganic crystal, which of course are fundamental to everything from battery technology in your smartphone to microchips. One of the interesting things about this is, of course, they found this vast array of things, but then you had to sort through all of that to find which crystals were actually stable structures that you might actually be able to do useful things with. But again, AI is very good at sifting through those things. As we know from AlphaFold, there are now teams who are using the data that has come out of systems like that to do things such as create vastly more efficient battery technology, which I think we can all probably immediately think of a whole bunch of useful applications for that and what we're doing. Imagine if you can charge your phone in 10 minutes and it lasts all year. There's a lot of people working on that one because the same advances in that, by the way, will power humanoid robotics, which is extremely power intensive. You might be able to double or treble the efficiency of solar technology. Again, how useful would that be for everything we're trying to do? If you want another example of what an AI-assisted design process looks like, which is highly relevant to our work, then of course consider that Google is already today using microchips that were designed with the aid of advanced AI systems within Google. So this is from another system called AlphaChip. AlphaChip is able to use AI to assist with floor planning in chip design. So floor planning is literally the physical layout of components on a chip. It is very, very complex, as you'd expect. It can take weeks or months to figure out exactly how to optimize the layout of those components. AlphaChip can do it in a few hours. And so what you do in that system is, of course, you're able to do things such as optimize the shortest amount of wire length between different components, which makes your chips much, much more efficient and faster. So, in fact, on the latest generation TPUs, which is Google's fancy AI chips and what they call them instead of GPUs, on the TPUs, in fact, you're seeing power efficiencies, thanks to AlphaChip, of more than 67% over the previous generation non-Alpha chip assisted designs. So if you think about all the power requirements for all the things we want to do, that might be extremely useful. And then this is where it gets even more interesting. So it truly is staggering and kaleidoscopic when you consider the impact of these systems, because of course, AI doesn't show up on its own. None of this arrives in a vacuum. And of course, one of the things I'm sure lots of them thinks about is quantum computing and access to those future generation supercomputers. Well, if you are able to use AI to assist with cracking all the vast number of technical obstacles in the way of quantum computing, the applications truly are extraordinary. This room probably knows quantum in much greater detail than I do in a bunch of cases. But of course, ultra precise, spacecraft navigation, building a secure internet backbone in space to assist with sending spacecraft to Mars. Obviously, using the power of these enormous supercomputers to actually develop new materials to build spacecraft with, all sorts of things that could be absolutely transformative in any number of realms. And then you get to one of my favorite things, because as I mentioned, I'm a big science fiction nerd, and one of the things that I'm sure all of us have spent years of our lives hoping for and praying that someone was actually going to crack this thing, almost as fundamental a scientific obstacle as AlphaFold and the protein folding problem, nuclear fusion. And of course, just like self-driving cars, it's always 10 years away conveniently. And every year someone will say it's another 10 years, and sooner or later it adds up. And yet, after more than 70 years of scientists trying to make commercial nuclear fusion a reality, we truly do believe we're not 10 years away. We are far closer to that today. And AI is playing a critical role in that. One of the things that we're seeing now in experimental tokamak reactors around the world is AI systems are being used to optimize the configuration of the plasma clouds inside there. If you can use AI to figure out how to optimize the magnetic coils and the voltages and shape that swirling ball, which is 100 million degrees Celsius plus, if you can do that, you might be able to create a reaction that lasts longer and then becomes something truly sustainable. And what could we do if we have access to clean, unlimited energy, which of course, with hydrogen isotopes coming from seawater, truly would change the world? Well, I'll tell you what one scenario looks like. This is what was told to me when I joined Google DeepMind, and Dennis talked about this one publicly, and it sent chills down my spine. So I'm going to share this one with you. We were talking to someone who was about to retire, and they said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life looking after my grandkids. Tell me something hopeful at a time when lots of things don't seem very hopeful in the world. Tell me what my grandkids might do in their lives one day if you succeed in doing everything you're doing with AI and you eventually get to AGI, human-level intelligence machines, artificial general intelligence. And this is what Dennis said. He said, your grandkids will be exploring the stars. And as Google's resident spin doctor on AI, I thought, I haven't heard any other executives use that messaging. Like, come on, unpack that one for me. And this is the story he sketched out. If you were able to achieve fusion successfully, what might you do with that? You might go and solve all sorts of other problems. And one of them might be, Dennis just happened to pick this one because it was top of his mind, access to water. You're probably thinking, what the heck does that have to do with it? Well, UN data tells us that by the 2050s, about 3/4 of the world's population might struggle with having consistent access to safe drinking water because of climate change, water wars, just the breakdown of infrastructure around the world. If you had some technology that could turn seawater into drinking water, you might be able to solve that problem, at least on the technical dimension. And of course, we have that. It's called desalination. It's been around for decades. It's very well proven. It's usually extraordinarily energy intensive. But if you have access to an artificial sun with clean, unlimited energy, that's not really a problem. And so what would access to water and then all the other resources that you optimize access to, that you turbocharge the world's industries and production with, you might be able to do something which is, of course, an animating part of one of the greatest, most inspiring science fiction depictions of the future, which may have got lots of you into space, Star Trek. You end up in a post-scarcity economy, something that has never existed in human history. And you have a vast abundance of resources that allows you to rebuild the world. And then you might just get to go and do the final, most expensive thing in human history, send millions of people to live amongst the stars. What a journey. It's not about making it 5% more efficient to read your PDFs on your computer, which is generally the really boring story that people tell themselves about AI. It is a story that is all about world building. It is civilizational in nature. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? It's something that would be inspiring. It's something that when people hear that, because we are all desperate for hope in so many ways, we all cling to it. I cling to it. But that's not the trajectory we're on. Our grandkids aren't going to the stars based on the current trajectory we're on. Not at all. I'm here to spoil your day. The next decade is going to be the most disruptive time in history. There are all sorts of other things happening in the world far away from the gaze of labs and AI models and all the wonderful breakthroughs in science that are in fact vastly more challenging for societies to cope with. We know right now that AI systems are transforming every part of the economy. They are having a massive impact on every job and role and organization. For certain companies, you're already seeing the impact across a lot of different jobs. Of course, millions of customer service roles are being automated or augmented before they are automated by AI. You're seeing lots of things that are pretty cool, actually. I've got a friend who's an architect. He told me all about how AI is being used to massively speed up the design of buildings. Everything from obviously being able to visualize what structures look like, but also comply with the ever-shifting maze of regulatory compliance. Behind all things seen, there are things that are much vaster and unseen. And everything that has changed our lives in the last decade of technology has been based on all of the code and infrastructure and systems that have been built. And of course, we now have AI systems which outperform 93% of programmers who are so good they take part in competitive coding contests. You are about to see a massive explosion in the ability of technologists to build all sorts of more powerful and capable systems and infrastructure, which might take us to the future. And of course, we're already seeing the impact across public services, education, every other realm of society. Well, what might that lead to? Well, it sort of is one of those things where people do just have such narrow views of what might happen. You probably think it's a lot of stuff involving officers and, sure, some people who are using Excel and doing things in that realm might have a pretty bad time if they don't adapt, except the systems reach into every realm of society, truly. I was in Los Angeles, actually, last year, and I saw a billboard on top of a construction site, and it said, "Hey, ChatGPT, finish this building." And I guess some construction union had put that up probably to make fun of this crazy hype and say, look, you can hype it up all you want, but ultimately you need some folks to go and actually build the thing. Well, may I present my good friends construction robotics, where they can lay 400 bricks an hour, which is 5 times faster than a human, carry massive pallets, much heavier than a human construction worker, on-site electric welding. You can tie rebar, which is one of the most time-consuming parts of a construction site, in 5.5 seconds, which is 8 times faster than a human. The average age of a construction worker in the United States is 43 years old. 10 years ago, it was 10 years younger. 80% of construction sites are behind schedule in the United States due to labor shortages, which are not getting any better due to certain things. And how likely is it, do you think, that in fact ChatGPT will finish this building? I would not bet against the system. And this is where you start to get into more and more interesting scenarios, more and more kaleidoscopic futures, because of course, we are truly terrible as humans in being able to process a truly complex world and all the rippling effects that come as each of those changes arrives in our society. And so, of course, people look at self-driving cars, the Waymos that you can take around Los Angeles now, and you think, that's pretty cool. I can get somewhere a bit faster, and it's nice because I get into the car, and I don't have to make any awkward small talk, and there's no weird music playing, and it's great. Except, what do you think will happen when self-driving cars are everywhere? And it might do things such as change fundamentally the nature of community. If you can get in a car and you don't have to drive yourself and deal with the terrible LA traffic I started talking about, then you might choose to live in different places entirely. Because of course, getting in a car and not having to drive yourself means that you might find it a much more relaxing experience. You might spend an hour watching Netflix, you might go back to sleep, you might get to work immediately. You could do all sorts of things. People will just make different choices. And in the current model, most of our workers tend to live in cities and close to the center of cities, as close as they can afford it, because they know that they are going to have to base their lives around that commute. And of course, that might not be the case. If your entire business model relies on footfall traffic around your stores, or it relies upon having a certain number of people in office real estate, you might have a real bad time in a few years as that technology rolls out. Materials design, I talked all about that. Well, what if you could use AI-assisted design to build hypersonic aircraft that carry passengers at Mach 10 around the world? What would happen if you could build an aircraft, not that anyone's trying to do it right now, that moves you from London to Sydney, Australia in 90 minutes? What would happen to local identity? What would happen to local culture? What would happen to sovereignty? What would happen to the idea of I'm a local business with a local market? What's local when the entire world is less than 90 minutes away? Sometimes things happen which utterly transform our relationship with distance. And it's happened many times in human history in the last couple of centuries. And the idea that it might happen again often seems too shocking for a lot of serious leaders to take seriously. And yet, sooner or later, the future arrives. And the thing about the future arriving is that's not some thing that's going to happen a long, long way away. It's happening really fast now. This is a photo inside a factory in China. These are the so-called dark factories, which is the final form of automation. They're called dark factories because you don't need to put the lights on because there's no human workers. You have achieved such a zenith of automation that you might be able to turbocharge all your industries with a level of precision and output that dwarfs any of the dinosaur sets of infrastructure in companies and countries that did not take the future seriously. This is the Xiaomi smartphone factory in Shenzhen, which can crank out one smartphone per second. By the way, that same supply chain and infrastructure can be used for making weapons. And there comes a future where a certain set of folks who took the future seriously a little bit earlier than everyone else, a little bit more seriously, might end up with such a runaway advantage that large chunks of the world which didn't take it seriously suddenly find their entire way of life under threat and the quality of life for large chunks of their population in retreat. And you might end up in a world where access to the same AI-powered systems, but plugged into a lot of other things, our social media apps, our information sources, actually becomes a way for people to discover how far behind in the race they are. And of course, this is the ancient Longo moment of exactly 1 month ago today in Nepal, when a whole generation of young people in Nepal who are living in poverty were able, thanks to TikTok and Instagram and a bunch of other apps, all AI-powered, were able to discover that the sons and daughters of the ruling elite were having lives of luxury. They were the ultimate Nepo babies. And of course, these folks all got very, very angry and they burned down the Nepalese parliament and stripped the finance minister and threw him in a river. That might just happen in more places as people's lives slip away in a future where our decision makers do not have a plan for the future. And of course, in a planetary age, which I know lots of us think about because we believe in planetary ideas, everything domestic always ends up international eventually. That is the whole story of this century. You cannot contain things in one nation anymore. Everything is connected to everything else. And of course, our international system is in full retreat now. It is decaying by the day. In Europe, of course, where I live, we are facing a full-scale war in Ukraine and the first full-scale drone war with 800 drones fighting for every square mile of the front line. And what is happening right now because of international order decaying is that the world's largest military rearmament in history is underway, with trillions of dollars committed since the start of this year to a new generation of weapon systems, which will all be powered by the next generation AI systems. All of that vast proliferation of hardware and software will combine with everything else, because as I said, nothing shows up on its own. You might end up in a world where the Chinese 6th generation fighters, such as this, shown off in January this year, as well as Golden Dome, the humongous effort that's obviously taking place here to militarize space, all become something that shifts the plane of battle to a larger, vaster scale, which rapidly exceeds the ability of our existing diplomatic structures to contain. Very simply, our ability to wage war against each other and exert destabilizing consequences for international order rapidly escalates. And then, unfortunately, because, as I said, the future just shows up, it's very inconvenient, you then run into climate change. And we don't like to talk about that anymore for some reason. But I tell people, you don't have to take climate change seriously. It takes you seriously, though. And of course, folks living in this city know about this, because that was Malibu in the first week of this year. It doesn't get closer to home than that, does it? Climate change is underway. It shows up. It is already having a massive, massive impact around the world. We know from all the data that the world's best scientists, and this is a room who loves scientists, so I'm sure you take it seriously, you can go and look at all the IPCC climate change data. It's all online to sift through. And I spent a lot of the last year sifting through it because I'm writing a book about this at the moment. And there are scenarios now with very slight deviations in Earth's climate systems where you end up in a world where this becomes the animating reality for large portions of the world. This was 10 years ago last month. The site, now some of you will probably remember this, the site of this little boy, Alan Kurdi. He was 3 years old. He tried crossing the Mediterranean with his mother and his 5-year-old brother. They all drowned, all trying to escape to a better life from Syria. And of course, what is happening now is that as Earth's natural systems fail, we are seeing the impacts on communities and the ability of societies to thrive. You are seeing that anger manifest in new ways, and you are seeing nations fail. The reason why 10 years ago there were 65 million refugees in the world, the greatest number in history. Today there are 123 million, which is more than 2 world wars combined. And in a model where Earth's climate continues on the path it is following, there is an entirely plausible model where by the middle of the 2050s, you have vast chunks of Earth's croplands fail. Between 50 to 65% of crops could fail in the most dramatic scenarios where Earth's water cycle breaks down. And in that scenario, you go from 123 million refugees and displaced people to 1 to 3 billion refugees, and the entire global south essentially fails. And in that scenario, who truly believes that going to space is going to be something that you even get permission from populations to go and do? How great the anger at those who are looking to go and do other things will be, how out of touch will we seem when vast chunks of humanity are failing? And of course, these are the protests that are outside SpaceX just a few months ago, as we saw what happens when folks who should be speaking up for humanity, instead choose to take the easy way out and only talk about the innovations without recognizing the future just shows up all of it together. And if those ideas that you might retreat from space seem fanciful, I often think about the images of the abandoned Buran spacecraft at Baikonur in Kazakhstan. The Soviet Union was the other space power of the 20th century, and the story of their space program ended up as a sad, rusting reminder of what could have been. Rusting away, forgotten, entire legacy of scientific leadership thrown into the abyss by leaders who did not take the future seriously in other ways. And then you come to that final fantasy, which a certain set of folks, I don't think folks in this room, but certainly there are some voices who have a notion that when things break down here, we need Mars as a backup plan for humanity, a hard drive to back things up. It's our escape plan. Do you truly believe that if your plan is to make humanity a multi-planet civilization and the planet where 100% of humanity lives fails, that is a viable backup plan? If your plan is literally to escape from Earth to Mars in that scenario, you're basically signing up for the largest murder-suicide pact in history. That is not a viable scenario at all. And so, in fact, this is my message to you, because this is a room of people I absolutely love with the ideals and the imagination to confront very big, hard truths. For humanity to be a multi-planet civilization, it's very inconvenient. You're going to need humanity. We're going to have to stand up for it. And I don't mean this in any sort of sentimental or aspirational way. I mean, truly, there's a different future on the line here. And one of the worst analogies, one of the worst lazy mental metaphors that people use about this world and what is happening is that all of this is some sort of tidal wave, or it's an asteroid heading for Earth, or it's an avalanche. It's a set of natural forces that are beyond our control. It may be tempting to look at all these things I'm telling you about and think, bloody hell, that's depressing. Guess I'll go home and buy canned goods. I'll just go and think about moving to New Zealand, as if that would get you out of it. And that isn't the future. The future isn't tidal waves. It's just the future. Just the future. It's the thing we have agency over. And with our choices, with agendas that can be absolutely shaped, because of course, things that are happening today seem perfectly implausible 10 years ago. If you can actually choose a different model for how you want to run a world and build a world, you might end up in the good trajectory. You might end up in one where all those technologies, which are wonderful and might cure cancer and realign the world around us, enable a future of vastly greater liberation and prosperity for the entire world. You might be able to harness all that technology to lead to a vast abundance in resources, which does build the foundations for enabling millions of people to reach for the stars. You might plumb new frontiers of the human imagination and artistic expression, and you might find new forms of international order, because everything that happens in history always looks implausible, and yet the world has changed so much in hundreds of years. 100 years ago, most of the world's population lived under the control of European empires, and Britain controlled 25% of the world. Things can happen that are unimaginable if you have the imagination to actually think beyond that. And this is why, in the end, for me at least, don't know about you, but I think I really believe in Mars. Of course we should go and reach the stars. By the way, the other lazy message is we should just abandon space and just go and focus on everything here. As a great civilization, as a civilization aspiring to be great, we've got to be able to do more than one thing at the same time. And there is a journey to Mars that is profoundly hopeful. It is necessary. The work must continue. We don't just stop and then one day pick it up. Too much is at stake in our future. And yet, if we believe in Mars, we must also believe in Earth, that planet where we all live and all our kids live. And over the last year, I've been thinking more and more as I get ready for things I'm about to do in my career, which are vastly more interesting than all the things I've done working for Elon and Google and so on. And I've ended up reading a lot of stuff from Martin Luther King Jr. And you may think, wow, that's a bit random. Not at all, because although a lot of folks only ever reduce what a great, brilliant thinker to a single set of inspirational quotes on a poster in your college dorm room, of course, he was a profound thinker. And one of the things I love the most is he said, through our scientific and technological genius, we've made of this world a neighborhood. And now through our moral and ethical commitment, we must make of it a brotherhood. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. And it is a mindset shift. It is a shift to a planetary vision of humanity. It is, in fact, saying humanity is not some weak or sentimental or aspirational idea. It is literally a frame of thinking and leading, which is of the highest set of ideals that any future leaders of a true multi-planet civilization, or any civilization that is worthy of the name now, must embrace. And if we do that, we might be able to carry out the hardest thing in human history and have a future human history which involves going all the way to Mars. So thank you very much. Keep going.